My husband and sister were taking care of me after my surgery, but I found their hidden messages. They were planning my replacement. I was lying in my bed, the scent of hospital-grade disinfectant still clinging to my skin and the dull, throbbing ache in my abdomen serving as a constant reminder of the 6-hour surgery I'd just survived. Thinking I was the luckiest woman in the world because I had Mark and Chloe by my side. Mark, my husband of 7 years, had been a saint, fluffing my pillows and bringing me ginger ale with a straw, while my younger sister Chloe had moved into our guest room in our quiet leafy suburb in Connecticut to help with the heavy lifting, while I was bedridden. For the first 10 days, everything seemed like a portrait of family devotion. Mark would kiss my forehead before heading to his architectural firm, and Chloe would sit at the edge of my bed, painting my toenails and whispering about how much she loved me. But the air in the room started to feel heavy, crowded with hushed conversations that died the moment I opened my eyes from a nap. It started with small things, like the way their hands would accidentally linger a second too long when they passed a glass of water over my lap, or the way I caught them standing in the hallway through the crack in my door, their heads bowed together in a way that didn't look like they were discussing my physical therapy schedule. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia brought on by the heavy fog of the oxycodone I was prescribed, telling myself that the trauma of a major abdominal surgery was just playing tricks on my mind, but my gut, the very thing the surgeons had just repaired, was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong in my own home. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon when Mark had supposedly gone to a late-night client dinner, and Chloe claimed she was heading to the 24-hour CVS to pick up my stool softeners and gauze. They had left me with my iPad, but it had died, so I reached for Mark's old MacBook that he'd left on the nightstand, thinking I'd just stream a movie to distract myself from the phantom pains in my side. When I opened the lid, the screen didn't show a desktop. It showed a synced iMessage account that Mark had forgotten to log out of, and the most recent chat pinned to the top was with a contact saved only as a sparkle emoji. My heart hammered against my ribs, a violent, erratic rhythm that made my surgical staples sting, as I scrolled up and saw a photo Chloe had sent him just an hour ago. It was a picture of her standing in my walk-in closet, wearing my favorite emerald green silk gala dress, the one Mark bought me for our 5th anniversary, with a caption that read, "It fits me better than it ever fit her, doesn't it? I can't wait until this is my room officially." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under my bed as I kept reading, my eyes blurring with tears of pure, unadulterated rage, as I discovered a digital paper trail of a betrayal so calculated it felt like a horror movie script. They weren't just having an affair, they were discussing my quality of life, and how the recovery complications they were planning to induce would make it look like my body just gave up. Mark had messaged her saying, "The doctor said she needs to be careful with the dosage of the blood thinners. If she forgets a few or takes too many, the internal bleeding will look like a standard post-op tragedy, and then we're free, Chloe. The life insurance policy is updated, the house is ours, and you won't have to be the little sister, hiding in the shadows anymore." Chloe had replied with a chillingly casual, "I've already started swapping the pills in her Monday morning organizer. She's so looped on the painkillers she doesn't even count the capsules anymore. So just keep acting like the grieving husband-to-be, and I'll handle the nursing part." I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the laptop illuminating the room like a cold grave, realizing that the two people I trusted most were currently at a hotel or a bar. Toast to my slow, methodical replacement while I was literally too weak to stand up and walk to the front door. I looked at the pill organizer on my nightstand, the little plastic lid for Wednesday already beckoning me, and realized that every dose I'd taken over the last 48 hours might have been a step closer to my own funeral. I wasn't just a wife or a sister to them. I was a hurdle, a financial windfall, and an obstacle in the way of the life they wanted to build on top of my bones. But they forgot one thing. I was the one who built this life. I was the one who earned the money that bought this house. And I was the one who had spent years protecting Chloe from her own bad decisions. My sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharpened clarity that I hadn't felt since before the anesthesia. I wasn't going to die in this bed, and I wasn't going to let them take a single cent of my hard-earned legacy. I carefully took screenshots of every single message, every photo of Chloe in my clothes, and every disgusting plan they had for my accidental demise, and I sent them to a hidden Google Drive folder and my best friend, who was a high-stakes divorce attorney in the city. As I heard Mark's car pull into the driveway and the front door click open, I quickly shut the laptop, slid it back onto the nightstand, and closed my eyes, feigning sleep while my heart roared in my ears, waiting for the caregivers to come in and check if their prey was still breathing. The door creaked open, and the floorboards groaned under Mark's familiar, heavy tread, a sound that used to bring me a sense of safety, but now sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my system that made my surgical incision burn with a phantom fire.
I kept my eyes squeezed shut, regulating my breathing into the slow, rhythmic pattern of someone deep in a drug-induced slumber, while every other sense I possessed was dialed to a lethal sharpness. I heard him approach the bedside, the scent of his expensive sandalwood cologne mixing with a faint, cloying hint of the jasmine perfume Chloe always wore, a scent that shouldn't have been on him if he'd spent the last 4 hours at a client dinner. He didn't kiss my forehead this time. Instead, I felt the slight weight of his hand hovering over the pill organizer on my nightstand, the plastic lids clicking softly as he checked the compartments. Still out cold, I heard him mutter under his breath, his voice devoid of the warmth he'd used when the nurses were around, sounding instead like a man checking a timer on a slow cooker. A few minutes later, the front door opened again, and Chloe's voice drifted up the stairs, high-pitched and breathless, as she announced she was home with the supplies. I listened to them meet in the kitchen directly below my bedroom. Their voices dropped to that conspiratorial murmur I now recognized as the sound of my life being bargained away. I heard the clink of wine glasses, celebrating, no doubt, and the muffled sound of Chloe's giggling as she said something about how the fog is getting thicker every day and how I was halfway to the finish line. My blood ran cold as I realized that the woman who had shared my childhood home, the girl I'd protected from bullies and helped through college, was currently laughing about my impending death over a glass of my own vintage Cabernet. I needed to act, but my body was a cage of pain and weakness. I couldn't just jump up and run to the police, not when I could barely make it to the ensuite bathroom without leaning on the walls. I waited until the house fell into a heavy, dark silence, the kind of silence that only exists when the predators think their prey is neutralized, and I reached for my phone, which I'd hidden under my mattress earlier. I had one message from my best friend Elena, the attorney. It was short and clinical, exactly what I needed. Folder received. Images clear. Do not ingest anything they provide. I'm contacting a private investigator to watch the house from the street starting at 6 a.m. Stay calm, act the part, and if you feel in immediate danger, text me the word red and I'm calling 911. Seeing those words gave me a sliver of hope, a foundation to stand on while the world I'd built was crumbling. The next morning, the nursing ritual began with a terrifying new intensity. Chloe came in at 8 a.m., her hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a forced, angelic smile that made my skin crawl. She brought me a bowl of oatmeal and a glass of orange juice, and alongside them, the Wednesday morning dose of my medication. My heart hammered as I looked at the little white capsules. In the blue light of the morning, I could see that one of the pills had a slightly different matte finish than the glossy ones I was used to. Chloe had been busy organizing again. Here you go, big sis, she cooed, sitting on the edge of the bed and stroking my hair with a hand that I now realized was probably used to touch my husband just hours ago. You need to stay on top of the pain management. The doctor said the next few days are critical for internal healing. I looked her dead in the eyes, searching for a flicker of the sister I used to know, but all I saw was a hungry, hollow ambition that had been masked by years of feigned incompetence. I took the glass, tucked the suspicious pill into the pocket of my cheek with a practiced sleight of hand I'd learned during a rebellious teenage phase, and swallowed a mouthful of juice, pretending to gulp the medication down. I made a show of being drowsy, leaning back into the pillows and letting my head loll to the side, watching through half-closed lids as Chloe's expression shifted from fake concern to a chilling, satisfied smirk. She picked up my dead iPad, tucked it under her arm, likely to ensure I remained digitally isolated, and whispered, "Sleep well, Sarah. You're going to be so much more peaceful soon." As soon as she left and I heard her footsteps retreat down the hall, I spat the pill into a tissue, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I tucked the evidence into a small velvet jewelry pouch I kept in my nightstand drawer, adding it to the collection of proof I was building. Every hour was a battle against my own exhaustion and the physical toll of the surgery, but the rage was keeping me awake, a cold, hard diamond of fury that was cutting through the medicinal haze. I realized that Mark had already started the replacement process in the real world too. I heard him on the phone in the hallway later that morning, talking to our insurance agent about clarifying the beneficiary status due to the uncertainty of post-op complications. He was already spending the money I'd earned, already measuring my closet for Chloe's shoes, and already planning the narrative of the grieving widower who found comfort in his sister-in-law's arms. But they didn't know that the PI Elena hired was currently sitting in a nondescript silver sedan at the end of our cul-de-sac, and they didn't know that I had spent the last 2 hours, while napping, recording their voices through a voice-activated app I'd left running on the MacBook tucked under my duvet. I caught Mark telling Chloe, "Once the internal bleeding starts, we just have to wait 45 minutes before calling the paramedics to make it look like we tried. It'll be quick, and then we never have to look back." I sat there in the silence that followed, realizing I wasn't just fighting for a divorce anymore. I was fighting for my life in a house that had become a gilded execution chamber. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare, a blurred montage of feigned weakness and silent, sharp-edged observation that pushed my sanity to the absolute brink. I had to become the perfect victim, letting my voice trail off into weak whispers and allowing my eyes to unfocus whenever Mark or Chloe entered the room, all while my brain was firing like a high-speed processor, cataloging every micro-expression and hushed exchange. Elena had messaged me through an encrypted app, letting me know the PI, a retired detective named Miller, had already captured footage of Mark and Chloe kissing passionately in our driveway while I was supposedly resting, and more chillingly, He'd seen Mark meeting with a local real estate agent at a Starbucks 3 towns over to discuss a discreet, fast cash sale of our home. They weren't just waiting for me to die, they were actively listing my life for sale while I was still breathing in the master suite. On Thursday morning, the cruelty took a physical turn when Chloe brought me my breakfast tray, her eyes gleaming with a manic sort of excitement that she couldn't quite hide behind her floral apron. She'd made a point to organize my bedside table, and I watched through a slit in my eyelids as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, unmarked amber vial, carefully shaking out 2 blue pills that were definitely not my prescribed vitamins or the antibiotics I needed to prevent infection. My heart did a slow, sickening roll in my chest as she placed them on the saucer next to my tea, her voice a sugary poison as she cooed. I talked to the surgical nurse on the phone, Sarah, and she said these new supplements will help with the heaviness you've been feeling in your chest. Just take them both and try to sleep for the afternoon. I knew exactly what those pills were, a potent sedative I'd seen her take for her anxiety years ago, likely meant to knock me out so deeply that I wouldn't notice if my internal monitors started failing or if they decided to speed up the complications while I was incapacitated. When she left the room to take a call, I didn't spit the pills into a tissue this time. I slid them into a small gap I'd discovered between the headboard and the wall, a graveyard for the chemical weapons they were trying to use against me. The most agonizing part was the emotional erasure. Mark came in later that evening, smelling of expensive scotch, and started talking about how he'd already pruned my rose garden because it was too much for me to handle now, and how he'd donated 3 boxes of my shoes to Goodwill because we need to clear the clutter for your recovery. He was literally erasing my footprint from the house, one item at a time, treating my belongings like the estate of a woman who had already passed away. I had to dig my fingernails into the palms of my hands under the duvet to keep from screaming, to keep from jumping out of bed and clawing his lying eyes out, but Elena's voice echoed in my head, evidence is the only thing that wins, Sarah. If you break character now, they'll claim you're having a psychotic break from the surgery meds and they'll have you committed or worse. So I stayed still, a statue of rage, even when Chloe walked in wearing my grandmother's vintage pearl necklace, the one I'd promised to my future daughter, claiming she was just keeping it safe so it wouldn't get lost in the chaos of the renovation plans they were discussing for my bedroom. The level of entitlement was staggering. Chloe had always been the sister who forgot her wallet at dinner or accidentally borrowed my clothes and ruined them, but I never realized that her envy had curdled into a murderous greed. By Friday night, the atmosphere in the house shifted from predatory to urgent. I heard them arguing in the kitchen about the timeline, Mark's voice rising in a sharp, jagged edge of panic as he whispered. The insurance investigator called about the policy writer, Chloe. We have to do it tonight. If she makes it to her follow-up appointment on Monday, the surgeon will see she's healing too well, and the window closes. It has to happen before the sun comes up. I felt a cold, electric shock of terror bolt through my spine, realizing that my time had officially run out. I wasn't just playing a part anymore, I was a woman on death row, and the executioners were currently sharing a pizza downstairs. I waited for the heavy silence of the house to settle, for the light under my door to click off, and I reached for the burner phone Elena had managed to slip into my last clean laundry pile via a courier who'd posed as a delivery driver. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type the 3 words that would change everything. They're moving tonight. Within seconds, the screen glowed with a reply. PI is on high alert. Police are stationed 2 blocks away. Keep your door locked from the inside if you can, and do not, under any circumstances, let them see you are awake. I looked at the heavy mahogany door, a door Mark had built with his own hands during our first year of marriage, and realized it was the only thing standing between me and a tragedy that was being orchestrated by the man who once promised to love me until death do us part. He was finally coming to fulfill that promise, but not in the way he'd vowed at the altar, and as I heard the first slow, deliberate creak of the stairs, I realized that the woman they thought they were replacing was already gone, replaced by a ghost who was ready to haunt them back to the gates of hell. The floorboard outside my door gave a sharp, agonizing groan, the sound of a predator finally closing in on a cornered animal, and I felt the metallic taste of pure terror coat the back of my throat. I lay perfectly still, my eyes squeezed shut so tightly I saw stars against the back of my eyelids, praying that my shallow, rapid breathing would pass for the rhythmic chest rises of a woman in a drug-induced coma. The door handle turned the slow, agonizingly deliberate metallic click, and the heavy mahogany door swung open on its hinges, admitting the cold, sterile light from the hallway and the unmistakable scent of Mark's sandalwood cologne. I felt the mattress dip as someone sat on the edge of my bed, and for a fleeting, insane second, a part of my brain wanted to believe he was there to tuck me in, but that hope died when I felt the cold, blunt tip of a plastic syringe press against the skin of my forearm, right near the foresight from the hospital. It's better this way, Sarah, Mark's voice whispered, a hollow, terrifying sound that held 0 traces of the man I'd loved for nearly a decade. It was the voice of a man clearing a ledger, performing a necessary but unpleasant task. I heard Chloe's voice from the doorway, sharp and impatient, urging him to just do it already before the neighbor's motion lights went off, and I realized they weren't even going to wait for the pills to work. They were injecting something into my bloodstream to finish the job. My hand, hidden under the heavy duvet, gripped the burner phone with a strength I didn't know my surgical body possessed, and I hit the send button on the emergency alert just as Mark's thumb began to press down on the plunger. Suddenly, the darkness of the street outside was obliterated by a violent, strobe-like explosion of red and blue lights, and the heavy silence of the house was shattered by the staccato rhythm of boots thundering up the front porch. The front door didn't just open, it was kicked off its frame with a sound like a gunshot, and a voice through a megaphone screamed, "Police! Put your hands in the air. Do not move." Mark jumped back from the bed, the syringe clattering to the hardwood floor, and I saw Chloe bolt for the hallway only to be tackled to the ground by two officers in tactical gear who had breached the upstairs window via the balcony. I sat bolt upright, my surgical staples screaming in protest, and looked Mark directly in his wide, panicked eyes as a detective pushed past him to shield me. "I'm awake, Mark," I croaked, my voice raw but fueled by a diamond-hard fury that made him flinch as if I'd struck him. I saw every message. I heard every whisper. I know about the sparkle emoji, and I know about the house sale. The mask of the grieving husband didn't just slip, it disintegrated, replaced by a frantic, sweating desperation as he started babbling about a misunderstanding and medical confusion. But the officers were already clicking the cold steel of handcuffs around his wrists. Miller, the PI, stepped into the room with a camera in hand, nodding to the detective, and I realized that the entire encounter, the syringe, the dialogue, the proximity, had been captured through a pinhole lens Elena had instructed him to install in the smoke detector the day before while Chloe was out. Chloe was shrieking from the hallway, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that I'd heard her use as a child to get her way, but this time there was no mom to comfort her, there was only the cold, clinical reality of the law. They were dragged out of my house in their pajamas, their feet dragging against the carpet I'd spent 6 months choosing for our anniversary, and as they were shoved into separate patrol cars, I felt a weight lift off my chest that had nothing to do with the surgery. Elena arrived 20 minutes later, her face set in a grim, professional mask, and as she sat on the edge of my bed, taking the spot my murderers had occupied just moments ago, she told me that the syringe they recovered contained a lethal concentration of potassium chloride, enough to stop my heart in seconds without leaving an obvious trace. They hadn't just been planning a replacement, they were committing a cold-blooded execution in the place where I was supposed to be safest. The police processed the house like a crime scene, dusting my pill organizer for fingerprints and bagging Chloe's nursing supplies as evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. As I was loaded into the ambulance to be taken to a secure medical wing for a proper toxicology screening and recovery, I looked back at the house, the colonial-style dream I'd built with my own blood and sweat, and realized that while they had tried to turn it into my tomb, it was now the site of their own destruction. The neon glare of the police lights faded as we pulled away, and I leaned back into the gurney, finally allowing myself to cry, not for the husband I lost or the sister who betrayed me, but for the woman who had fought through the haze and the pain to save herself when no one else would. The recovery wing of the hospital felt like a sanctuary, a place where the air was clean and the people around me actually cared if my heart kept beating. And as the weeks passed and my physical strength returned, the legal storm I'd unleashed began to systematically dismantle the lives of the two people who had tried to bury me. Mark and Chloe's trial was a media circus that gripped our quiet corner of Connecticut, but the sensationalism didn't matter because the evidence Elena and Detective Miller had gathered was an absolute, suffocating mountain of guilt that left no room for the medical misunderstanding defense their high-priced lawyers tried to spin. The footage from the smoke detector was played in a silent, horrified courtroom. Seeing Mark sit on my bed with that lethal syringe while Chloe urged him on from the doorway was a moment of such chilling, calculated evil that even the stenographer had to stop and take a breath. The judge, a formidable woman who had seen the worst of humanity but seemed particularly revolted by this level of familial betrayal, didn't hold back during sentencing, calling them predators who wore the masks of caregivers before sentencing Mark to 25 years without the possibility of parole and Chloe to 18. Watching them being led away in shackles, Chloe's face finally stripped of its fake angelic glow and replaced by a hollow, terrified realization that her beauty couldn't save her from a prison cell. I felt a profound sense of justice that was better than any pain medication I'd ever been prescribed. My divorce was finalized within 90 days, a record-breaking speed because Mark was a convicted felon who had tried to murder his spouse, and the court awarded me every single asset we'd ever shared: the house, the architectural firm's equity, and the life insurance policies he'd tried to manipulate. I sold that colonial house in the suburbs before the ink on the deed was even dry. I couldn't stand to walk those floorboards or look at the stairs where I'd heard the sounds of my own death being planned, so I used the proceeds to buy a sun-drenched loft in the city, a place with high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows where the only scent in the air is fresh eucalyptus and expensive coffee. Elena helped me navigate the financial recovery, ensuring that Chloe's attempts to replace me resulted in her having nothing but a commissary account funded by the meager wages she earns in the prison laundry room. I heard through the grapevine that Chloe tried to write me a letter from jail, some rambling manifesto about how our parents always favored me and how she just wanted her turn, but I burned the envelope without opening it, realizing that her envy was a poison I'd finally purged from my system. My recovery from the surgery was long and grueling, and there are days when my abdomen still aches when the weather changes, but that ache is now a badge of survival rather than a symbol of weakness. I've started a non-profit organization that provides legal and medical advocacy for women in high-stakes recovery situations, making sure that no one else ever feels as isolated or vulnerable as I did in that bed. I spend my weekends traveling seeing the parts of the world Mark always said we couldn't afford while he was secretly funneling my money into a life for him and my sister. I'm currently sitting on a balcony in Florence, the Italian sun warming my skin, realizing that while they were planning my replacement, they actually paved the way for my rebirth. I realized that family isn't defined by shared DNA or a marriage certificate, it's defined by who stays when the lights go out and who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself. My best friend Elena is flying out to join me tomorrow, and as I look out over the Arno River, I finally understand that the woman they tried to unalive was just a cocoon for the woman I was meant to become, someone who is strong, someone who is wealthy, and someone who will never again mistake a predator's smile for a caregiver's love. The replacement they planned is now just a footnote in a story about a woman who took her life back one screenshot and one heartbeat at a time. And as I silence my phone to enjoy the sunset, I know with absolute certainty that I am the only one who gets to decide how my story ends. That's my read on it. I already know some of you are shaking your head right now. Tell me why in the comments. I want to see every angle.